my name is Brittany J. Jones. In this video, I will be demonstrating how to use our seam allowance to make casings for boning. Let's get started. To form casings in the seam allowance for boning, I'm going to be using this bodice here. This bodice is from Simplicity 9576, and I'll be using this in this demonstration. As you can see, I have the bodice sewn together here. This is what it looks like on the outside, and on the inside, this is what it looks like here. On the front, I have the seams here from my side, front and front. I have them pressed going toward the front, and then my side seam and my back center seam, I have those pressed going toward the back. The first thing that you want to do when using the seam allowance to create casing for boning is to not trim your seam allowance. We usually trim after we stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, but because we're using the seam allowance to create the casing, it's important not to trim it away. Once you have your seam allowances pressed in the direction according to your pattern, now we need to stitch through all thicknesses from our previous stitch in a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So from our previous stitch, we're going to come over to 3/8 of an inch, and then we will stitch to create our casing. We will do that for all of our seams where we will be installing the boning. So let's head to the sewing machine and start stitching now. Okay, now that we have stitched our casings in place, now we can go ahead and grab our boning. This is the boning here that I have. It is a 1/4 of an inch wide, and it does come in a casing. The first thing that we need to do is trim according to how long the seam is. So I'm just going to lay my casing here right along the seam line just to get a rough measurement. But when you're doing this, you want to keep in mind that you do not want to include your seam allowance up here along the top as well as the bottom. So you want to make sure that you do not include the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance for the top or for the bottom here where you will finish sewing the garment. If you need to, you can get a ruler to mark your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, again, you want to make sure that you exclude those. So I'm going to start it from about here, measure down to that one, and now I'm just going to trim it. Okay, now that I have it trimmed for the length that I need here, I'm going to remove it from the casing. And you want to trim away a 1/4 of an inch along the top and the bottom of it. And when you trim it away, you want to round it. The reason why you want to round it is so it won't poke you through the garment and be uncomfortable. So you want to round it. And also if you don't round it, it could poke through the fabric. So we're going to trim away a 1/4 of an inch here, and we're going to round it while we're trimming away. So this is what it looks like after I have rounded it. This is what the end looks like that I haven't rounded. So make sure that you round it so it's not so sharp and it won't poke you and be uncomfortable in the garment. Okay, once you have it trimmed down, now we can go ahead and insert it through the casing. If it helps, you could go ahead and baste across the upper edge if you're going to bring it up from the bottom, or the lower edge if you're going to bring it through the top. That way you know you have one side already basted in place, and then you just have to baste the other side. But I'm just going to go ahead and just insert it through the casing that we've created with our seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and repeat those same steps. Okay, I've just done my basting stitch along the top and the bottom to encase the boning. I have my boning in all of the casings that we have created with our seam allowance. With this pattern, Simplicity 9576, you will interface your main fabric, so that will add another layer of stability to the fabric, and you will also line it. So there are a couple more layers of fabric to go to really have this bodice take shape. But I do hope you have enjoyed seeing how to use your seam allowance to create casings for boning.